Muy buenos días, muy buenas tardes a todos. Mi nombre es Irene Alfaro, soy directora gerente senior de ARPEL, la Asociación de Empresas de Petróleo, Gas y Energía Renovable en América Latina y Caribe. Primero, aclararles que esta sesión cuenta con servicio de interpretación simultánea, español-inglés, inglés-español, y para acceder al mismo tienen que ir al menú inferior y cliquear en el icono de los 3 puntos y en interpretación seleccionar el idioma de su preferencia. También aclararles que esta sesión está siendo grabada para luego compartirla con todos los interesados y para toda la audiencia aclararles que tenemos también en el menú inferior un icono para preguntas y respuestas, el que esperamos que utilicen durante toda la sesión para plantear sus preguntas, cuestiones que quieran plantear a los panelistas. Eh, Sin más, agradecer mucho a Ipieca esta oportunidad. Tenemos una trayectoria de cooperación y trabajo en conjunto con Ipieca de varias décadas y es un honor para nosotros apoyar esta iniciativa tan relevante para todo el sector y en especial para Arpel. El tema metano está en el top de prioridades de nuestra agenda. Adelante, Adam. Le doy la palabra ahora al moderador de la sesión.
Thank you so much. On behalf of Ipieca, I'd first like to thank our PEL, ACP, and AMEXHI for helping to co-organize these webinars and support from IOGP and OGDC as well. I'm personally really excited to host webinars over the next 3 weeks on a variety of important methane management topics in the oil and gas sector. For today's topic, we're going to focus on source abatement, which is good facility design and operating practices, which is a key piece of methane management program. I'm honored to share the floor with 3 experts who are planning to share their practical experience with implementing projects, both in Latin America and similar regions globally. Our first speaker is Valeria Angelino, who's a senior customer engagement manager at Baker Hughes. Valeria is an aerospace engineer by background, but has more than 10 years of experience in the oil and gas industry on turbine technology implementation. She's using that mechanical systems knowledge to help customers in designing flaring and methane reduction projects. Valeria, over to you.
Thank you very much, Adam. There we go. So thank you very much again for inviting me to this session. Let's discuss why it is important to talk around methane. Well, methane is a greenhouse gas, and it is much more potent than CO2 in making the planet warmer. And now we have one good news and one bad news. The first one, which is the good one, is that to tackle methane emissions, we have the technology available. The bad news is we have to cut those emissions globally by 45% to put up with the Paris Agreement's targets. So you can understand that if we look at the oil and gas industry, it is crucial to look at this specific sector, and to cut the emissions is absolutely crucial to do that. But what are the emissions, the methane emissions that are in the oil and gas value chain, and what are the solutions that we can deploy? So here you can see 4 different buttons of different colors that represent the different methane emissions. We have the flaring ones, the blue circle, and the gas flaring is the burning of the natural gas that is associated with oil extraction. Venting with the green dot, it is the release of unignited waste or excess gas into the atmosphere, either by design or due to a malfunction. while flaring is very visible to the eye because we are all familiar with the big torches, venting is actually naked to the eye. Fugitives, the yellow dot, it is unintentional escape of gases into the atmosphere, which are often due to equipment leaks, old infrastructure, poor design, or inefficient equipment. Finally, we have the combustion one, which are the orange one, which are the emissions that come from equipment that is used in upstream operations, such as the diesel engines, which burn fuels that releases the combustion emissions. So here you can see which type of emission is actually in every segment of the whole oil and gas value chain. And there are several solutions that can be deployed in each segment. What is important to state here is the fact that these solutions are not silos, but they can be deployed in different parts. And it is very important to understand which are the peculiarities of customer assets to make sure you are addressing the pain points in the right way. Building on this, partnering with our customers and discussing with our customer which are their pain points, which step of the way are they to cut their emissions is absolutely fundamental. We know that also in the Latin region, in the Latin American region, the different countries and the different customers are at different steps of their decarbonization journey. So partnering with the customer, with the institution, with the governments is fundamental to make sure we make this happen. First step, of course, is to understand which are your emissions. How much are you emitting? Which are your emission sources? Which are then the solutions you can deploy to make sure you can cut them? So again, companies like ours can help in the sector to make sure we can define the solution that tackle the different type of emissions at every step of the way of which customer is, but also so that the customer can keep their emissions low. Focusing on flaring, here there is reported the 3 different ranges that World Bank provides in their tracker. We have the large volumes, which are above 50 million SCAF. In the Latin region, we only have one asset that sits with this kind of volume. They usually are typical, more of a region like the Middle East. 5 up to 50 million SCAF, which is the medium one. And again, in the region, in Latin region, we have just one other asset that actually sits here. And then where the LATAM is actually sitting, which is in the small scale, under 5 million SCAF. Again, you can understand that looking at the different volumes, different solutions and different CapEx intensities associated with these solutions can be deployed to make sure the solution not only makes the emission cutting happen, but it's also viable to the customer. So let's look in detail and understand what is the flaring situation in Latin America. Here there are reported the numbers that are according to the latest global tracker released by World Bank, and also the picture you see here is a screenshot from World Bank. To give you some numbers to have an order of magnitude, in 2024, the whole world has flared a volume of gas that is 14,609 million SCAF. Of this volume, slightly more than 12% is related to Latin America. Among the volume that Latin America is flaring, Venezuela is responsible for almost half of it, and the top 5 flaring countries in the region are actually responsible for almost 95% of the whole volume. These 5 countries actually, as you know, they are in different moments of their decarbonization journey, and also with respect to the type of commitment that they are taking publicly. Here there are highlighted Mexico, Ecuador, and Brazil as endorser of the zero routine flaring by 2030, which is an initiative that commits governments and oil companies to end routine flaring by 2030. And the initiative aims to support the collaboration between all relevant stakeholders so that the solutions that to gas flaring can be found with the appropriate collaboration. Again, partnership is a key point. Looking at the numbers of the volumes of flaring here in the bottom right, you can see that even though we have these assets that I mentioned before that are large, actually the average of the region is 2 million SCAF. So it is quite small. So which are the solutions that we can deploy in the region and why? For sure, one important solution that is to transform the associated gas that would be otherwise flared into power by utilizing gas turbine. This is a solution that can work in regions where the grid is weak, and can help us also to displace the equipment that is driven by diesel, which is a very high emitting. Another solution is to transform the flare gas and compress it. So either by cleaning it and then compress it, or to compress it directly, it can be given back to the pipeline, or it can be reinjected, which is very good because this is something that can help increase the production. And it can also be clusterized into a centralized location to then dispose in a different way. Then there is a third one that actually is a more disruptive way of looking at it, of course, but it can open to different markets that are not yet present in the region, like transforming the flare gas into another different value, which can be hydrogen, LNG, low carbon aviation fuels, methanol. Those are modular solutions that can be deployed with this kind of size of flaring, and they can be deployed also in remote areas. Of course, when looking at the region, there are, of course, some challenges that need to be addressed, like the lack of infrastructure and some issues related to the economics of the region. But, of course, if we prioritize and accelerate the flare reduction in Latin America, not only we are cutting the greenhouse gases and we improve the air quality for local communities, but also we can enhance the energy efficiency by capturing the gas that is wasted, and we can use it to generate a revenue that strengthens the energy security and, most importantly, supports the sustainable economic development of the region. Thank you very much.
Amazing. Thank you, Valeria, for a really interesting and informative presentation. Our second speaker today is Angela Zivkovic, who's an environmental and conservation policy manager at Oxy. Angela is a chemical engineer by background, but has been working on air quality and GHG policy for more than 15 years, including stops as a regulator in the US state of Wyoming and developing multiple sustainability initiatives, including methane emissions during her time at Occidental Petroleum, or Oxy. Angela, over to you.
Thank you, Adam. Appreciate the opportunity. For those that are not familiar with Oxy, it is an international energy company, and we have assets primarily in the United States, also in the Middle East and North Africa. Oxy is among the largest producers for our US operations and is a big producer in the states of Texas, New Mexico, and Colorado, also known as the Permian and DJ basins. We also have offshore operations in the Gulf of Mexico, and we have a low carbon ventures subsidiary to advance low carbon technologies and business solutions, primarily around carbon capture and sequestration. Today, I'll primarily be focused on our onshore emissions and solutions for mitigating methane and greenhouse gases. I'll talk through our company-wide approach for methane mitigation, and then provide some examples of, well, one example in an operating area in Colorado, where we have been able to plan and execute a field-wide strategy that began back in 2013. The approach has some unique characteristics for that basin that can't be applied everywhere, but there are some good learnings from the process that could be informative for others. As part of as Oxy's greenhouse gas strategy, management strategy, we participate in a number of organizations, voluntary organizations, Ipieca being one, OGCI. We are committed to the Aiming for Zero Methane Emissions Pledge, the Environmental Partnership, which is a domestic US partnership between industry where we learn and collaborate from each other to make sure that environmental progress is not a competitive space, that we can all move forward together. We also are part of OGMP 2.0 and had signed on as original signatory at COP28 to the OGDC and have been part of the World Bank's zero routine flaring commitment for a number of years. As part of our work in the domestic US, we collaborate with the federal agency at the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, as well as our state regulators. And that work to collaborate and provide constructive input to them is focused around improving the effectiveness and efficiency of methane reductions and ensuring that they are cost effective. I'm going to go back one more. So wanted to touch on this. We've been tracking our greenhouse gas emissions more completely from a 2019 baseline. And we've been able to reduce our emissions through continued deployment of advanced methane detection technologies, consolidation of compression facilities, and converting production facilities to be tankless, along with the elimination of natural gas-driven pneumatic devices. So these are a number of efforts that we've gotten underway, and they are sometimes driven by federal regulations or state regulations, but a number of these efforts are voluntary efforts as part of our commitments to some of the voluntary initiatives I mentioned, and also to Oxy's own company net zero goals. So through those efforts that I mentioned, since 2019, we have been able to reduce total methane emitted from our operated assets by 73%. And just from 2023 to 2024, we reduced them by 23%. We've also been progressing our work around total GHG emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, our CO2 equivalent and intensity, as well as our methane intensity. In 2024, our company-wide operation, including some of the other businesses, reduced our greenhouse gas CO2 equivalent by almost 29%. And that's from our 2019 baseline. And in just the years 2023 to 2024, we were able to reduce that by 40%. Sorry, wrong number, 11%. My apologies. That's the carbon dioxide equivalent. The methane emission intensity was reduced by 40% from 2019 to 2023. We also remain ahead of our schedule in our commitment to the World Bank's zero routine flaring by our 2030 initiative. In 2024, we sustained zero routine flaring across our US oil and gas operations for all our states. And globally, we've reduced routine flaring and made significant progress in just 2024. And we reduced our flaring by 80% in 2024 compared to a 2020 baseline. The main way we have accomplished that reduction in flaring through reductions in routine flaring and also non-routine flaring is a combination of technology changes, operational changes, and increasing combustion as well. One novel idea that we've been implementing in our Texas and New Mexico assets in the Permian Basin is a closed loop gas capture technique, where we are eliminating the need for flaring when gas pipeline takeaway capacity is restricted, or if that pipeline is under maintenance or is not accepting gas for any reason. We can temporarily store our gas in a designated well nearby, and then the oil continues in the pipeline. And then once we are able to sell our gas in the pipeline again, we can turn that well on, reroute it back to the original well, and that helps that well continue to flow without it being shut in to eliminate that flaring. Just want to touch on, we mentioned one of our low carbon venture opportunities here on the right side. I won't go through all of these, but one of our big milestones that will be upcoming this year is the commissioning and startup of operations of our direct air capture plant that we call Stratos. So we're excited for that to happen. A lot of our success has been around our finding and fixing, as well as the measurement and predicting our emissions. And I'll talk through how we've evolved this program and what we find successful. So the on-site inspections that we do primarily with optical gas imaging may be required by regulations, but we've layered onto that the application of methane detection technologies that provide operational benefits beyond just compliance or even environmental stewardship. There's an operational benefit for us. Some of that is around reduced on-site inspection and maintenance, because we can send our field staff to the locations we know have some issue going on. We've been able to extend equipment life through enhancing our reliability and asset integrity. We've also enhanced process safety and community relations. Just the public around us and the community appreciate us looking at these sources more. So after that initial expenditure, really things progressed quite quickly, and we're able to find the value in that through our operational efficiencies. I'm going to move on to some specifics around our Colorado Basin and what is called the Denver-Julesburg Basin. It's a great example of how we've been able to execute a methane reduction program throughout the years and evolve that program. Oxy's operations here in the Denver-Julesburg Basin in Colorado are low shale unconventional development, and that presents some opportunities, as well as a lot of our locations, our facilities are consolidated, and we have access to electric grid power for most of our locations because it is closer to community. So Colorado has some of the most stringent regulations in the United States among all of the states, and more stringent than the federal requirements. And they started regulating methane back in 2014, and they built off of that throughout the years. And part of their requirements is now a greenhouse gas intensity program as well. So some of these changes you'll see here around the timeline were driven by regulation, but many were just proactive efforts. We started to see, as the regulations were being developed, that there was a operational advantage to being proactive in reducing emissions before the regulations required controls, and also just lessened our compliance and increased operational efficiencies for much of what you see here along the line. What a big advantage for us was the early planning for field development. And then we used a continuous learning mindset to improve over the years. We had the advantage of thinking through what our whole field advantage would look like and built out liquid pipeline infrastructure. As I mentioned, we have grid power. And so we were able to do a number of things here. You'll see starting in 2013, we started to design and build what we called tankless facilities. These early designs did have produced water tanks. Now we have some locations where we are able to build it without any tanks. And that's really been the biggest reductions that we've seen, is eliminating those tanks at new facilities. And then starting back in 2017, we went back to older locations and we're able to tie many of those into our newer tankless facilities so that we didn't have the tanks at the older facilities as well. And so between that, you reduce truck traffic, emissions, dust, noise. There's a lot of benefits there. You can see we did a number of iterations of designs, removing our pneumatics. Where we do have to have tanks, we have vapor recovery units, and that we continued to look at what our next largest source was and address that. The biggest advantage here too for us is a 24-hour integrated operations center that ties in to one facility that's manned all day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week throughout the year. And they can see all the operational parameters. They can remotely shut in wells, and they can also anticipate. We have pressure transducers on the tanks we do have, and they can see when those are going to overpressure, and it automatically chokes back the flow to those tanks so we don't overpressure any pressure relief valves. Incorporating the measurement and monitoring has been a big benefit as well. It really helps us verify and understand that we've been able to reduce our largest sources, and then how do we continue to improve. One thing we found with some fixed continuous monitoring sensors was that there was a heater treater not properly tuned, because we had a CO, carbon monoxide sensor, along with the methane sensor, and that was able to identify that there was an issue with the heater treater. We turned that and we applied those learnings, went through and tuned all of the other heater treaters in the field. So we've made emission reductions, and operations can target which locations they can go through. Or here, our measurement, we're looking at reconciling our emissions here for OGMP 2.0, as well as some of the other efforts. Carbon credits for our direct air capture plant are very important, and that also uses methane measurement and verification for those. So as we continue to build those low carbon facilities, that will be important. And that is the end of mine. Thank you.
Thanks, Angela, for sharing your impressive experience with what's been working in Colorado for you all at Oxy. Our final speaker today is Santiago Martinez, who's Director of Sustainability at Geopark. Santiago's been working on climate change, sustainability, and environmental policy for more than 15 years, including senior roles at Ecopetrol and the Ministry of Environment in Colombia. Santiago, over to you.
Yes, now. Bueno, muy buenos días a todos. Voy a hacer mi intervención en español y procederé eventualmente. No, estoy oyendo la traducción. Spanish, ya. Ahora sí. Entonces voy a hacer mi presentación en español y las preguntas las atenderé en inglés. Muy rápidamente, ¿quién es Geopark? Y la razón de explicar pues, quiénes somos en parte es para dimensionar el tipo de compañía que somos. Somos una empresa independiente que opera principalmente en Colombia. En Ecuador estamos de salida y en Argentina estamos en los próximos meses buscando regresar a este país, en donde iniciamos operaciones hace 22 años y pues estamos produciendo alrededor de 35.000 barriles, nuevamente para dimensionar el tipo de actividades que podemos hacer en materia de metano con el alcance de nuestra operación. Muy rápidamente de contexto, y lo veíamos hace un segundo en la presentación de Baker Hughes, Colombia ha venido avanzando de manera significativa en sus reducciones de emisiones de metano. Sin embargo, tienen un peso importante en la matriz de emisiones del país. En un 27% están asociadas a metano, no todas asociadas a la industria. De hecho, si hacemos el double clic, es tan solo 2.6 de las emisiones, 2.6% de las emisiones de metano del país están asociadas al sector. Estas cifras pueden eventualmente cambiar en la medida que se sigan haciendo mediciones directas y de hecho estamos a la espera de un estudio en donde participó Naciones Unidas para ver si las emisiones del sector, y probablemente lo serán, estarán algo subestimadas. Simplemente para mencionar que Colombia hace parte del Global Methane Pledge de alcanzar una reducción del 30% de metano versus una línea base del 2020, hace parte de la iniciativa de cero quemas rutinarias y es uno de los principales, de los primeros países en la región de haber expedido una regulación bastante exigente en materia de regulación de gestión de metano. Y en un segundo vamos a ver esto qué tipo de implicaciones tiene, que en el país haya una regulación específica para la identificación y cierre de emisiones de metano. Rápidamente, ¿cómo ha venido avanzando la compañía en su plan de descarbonización? Si nos comparamos con la línea base del 2020, hemos venido ya reduciendo el nivel de intensidad en un 28% versus esa línea base, y alrededor de una cuarta parte de esa reducción de emisiones ha estado asociado a la gestión de metano, lo cual no es menor. Muy rápidamente, no me voy a detener acá, pues contamos con un plan de gestión de metano que tiene muchos de los elementos que ya han mencionado anteriormente, tan solo para decir que, y ahorita lo vamos a ver, el tipo de mediciones que se han adelantado desde Geopark a la fecha han sido mediciones consideradas bottom-up o de abajo hacia arriba. Estamos contemplando la posibilidad de hacer mediciones de arriba hacia abajo para asegurar que no estamos dejando por fuera emisiones significativas dentro de nuestras operaciones, y lo que faltaría, digamos, en esta evolución de nuestras mediciones sería después hacer esa reconciliación entre las emisiones de abajo hacia arriba y las de arriba hacia abajo, y estamos en ese proceso. Contamos ya con nuestra línea base y ahorita vamos a ver qué tipo de acciones hemos venido adelantando. También para resaltar, aún no contamos con una meta específica de reducción de metano, y en un segundo explicaré dónde está, digamos, la dificultad de avanzar en este sentido, pero lo estamos analizando también. Principalmente hemos adelantado 3 tipos de acciones para la reducción de emisiones de metano. Primero, todo lo que es reducción de fugas, y ahorita voy a mostrar muy rápidamente cómo ha venido avanzando ese plan de identificación y cierre de fugas y venteos. En esta evolución también hemos reemplazado en algunos casos esos venteos por unas quemas centeas cuando no es posible el aprovechamiento, y hemos instalado una serie de unidades recuperadoras de vapores para eventualmente hacer un aprovechamiento de ese gas, en algunos casos para cogeneración de energía. Muy rápidamente, gracias a este programa que hemos venido implementando desde el 2020, se han logrado reducir en un 74% las emisiones directas de metano identificadas. Y recalco en el identificadas porque, pues, en la medida que seguimos avanzando en adoptar nuevas tecnologías, pues tendremos que entender si estas cifras se mantienen o si hay esfuerzos adicionales que tengamos que hacer como compañía. Pero solo para recalcar que, pues, que a pesar de, digamos, de las limitaciones que hemos tenido, no son menores las reducciones alcanzadas a la fecha. Muy rápidamente, y no me voy a detener en el detalle, el mensaje que quiero transmitir aquí es que se está adelantando un programa riguroso de constante identificación de fugas y cierres, y este es un programa, digamos, que no para y que está muy en línea con la regulación colombiana. Importante resaltar que cuando arrancamos las mediciones en el 2000, digamos, a comienzos del 2020, teníamos estimadas unas emisiones de 2.734 y pasamos a 10 veces esa cifra. Lo que demuestra es que claramente estábamos subestimando esas emisiones iniciales, lo que habla de la importancia de hacer mediciones directas. Muy rápidamente, esto es parte de nuestra curva de abatimiento y lo que quiero transmitir acá es que no necesariamente han sido las alternativas más costo efectivas que tenemos en el portafolio. De hecho, cuando vemos esta pequeña línea amarilla y la línea roja, lo que vemos es que aquellas iniciativas asociadas a reducción de venteos o reducción de emisiones fugitivas, de hecho, son aquellas que más le han costado a la compañía, y probablemente sin haber estado una regulación de por medio, pues no hubiera habido un incentivo económico que nos impulsara, digamos, a llevar estas medidas. Lo que habla entonces en parte es de la efectividad de la reducción, que en este caso entonces, pues no importa si es costo efectivo o no, pues claro que importa, pero digamos que el driver principal en esas reducciones ha sido el regulatorio. Un poco esta gráfica revela lo mismo. Lo que hicimos aquí fue un análisis comparativo en la región con otros activos para entender pues qué tan costo efectivas habían sido nuestras medidas. Entonces, lo primero que podemos concluir es que en lo que es reducción de quema al TEA, en TEAs estamos por debajo de la media de nuestros pares regionales. Sin embargo, cuando ya vemos los costos de abatimiento en términos de venteos y emisiones fugitivas, estamos por esa media en términos de costos. Nuevamente, haciendo entonces muy importante el tema regulatorio que impulsó esas acciones. Muy rápidamente, y aquí no me voy a detener, hicimos una breve comparación con esa regulación colombiana y OGMP 2.0. Y bueno, lo primero es decir que estamos cumpliendo 100% con la regulación colombiana, pero lo segundo es decir que hay enormes similitudes entre las dos. De hecho, la Coalición por el Clima y el Aire Limpio participó activamente en la elaboración de la norma colombiana, lo que lleva a que haya cierta coincidencia. Sin embargo, pues no lo lleva uno hasta el nivel. Diferencias, por ejemplo, significativas es la regulación colombiana no me lleva a mí a tener que medir emisiones con activos no operados o hacer gestión con activos no operados. No requiero de un cumplimiento de una meta específica, entre otras. Sin embargo, pues sí ha sido muy efectiva nuevamente en impulsar internamente este tipo de programas. Si fuéramos a hablar en términos de en dónde estamos en este camino de nivel de medición, diría que estaríamos entre un L3 y un L4 para aquellos que están familiarizados con estas siglas en términos del estándar de OGMP. Entonces, ya para terminar, pues lo primero es mencionar que nuevamente ya lo dije, que hay enormes similitudes entre la norma colombiana y OGMP, lo cual pues ha llevado a que operadores como Geopark en el país hayan de alguna manera entonces impulsado este tipo de programas. Siguen existiendo retos de tipo financiero para operadores independientes como Geopark, porque como lo vimos, no todas las alternativas que tenemos a la mano se pagan por sí sola. A la fecha no hemos identificado opciones de financiación como si pueden eventualmente estar teniendo empresas estatales con, por ejemplo, banca multilateral, etcétera, pero seguimos en ese camino. Estamos en este momento evaluando la posibilidad de hacernos partes de OGMP 2.0 y de la iniciativa de cero quemas rutinarias, pero hay dos temas que estamos teniendo en cuenta. Lo primero es, en la medida que buscamos operar en otras jurisdicciones, Argentina, Brasil, etcétera, nos interesa mantener un mismo estándar en nuestras operaciones. Es decir, no necesariamente estar asociado a una jurisdicción como la colombiana, y el hacernos parte de una iniciativa internacional de alguna manera nos permite mantener un estándar en toda la operación, en todas las jurisdicciones. Y finalmente estamos en un proceso también de buscar alianzas con otros operadores, de manera que podamos llevar a cabo mediciones, por ejemplo, top-down con bien sea satélites o algunas soluciones aerotransportadas con otros operadores en las zonas, de manera que sean más costo efectivas las soluciones de identificación de emisiones de metano. Y con eso termino.
Thank you so much, Santiago. It's a very impressive work going on at GeoPark, and I appreciate you sharing the methane management journey that you all are on. We're going to move on to the question and answer portion of the regulation, or sorry, of the webinar and presentation. If you have additional questions that have come up as you're digesting the information the speakers have said, please use the Q&A function at the bottom to submit, and we'll try to get to as many as we can in the next 15 minutes or so. I'm going to start off with a question that's come in from the audience. Angela in Colorado, Santiago in Colombia, both of you mentioned operating in jurisdictions with existing methane regulation. Valeria, I'm sure you have experience with clients implementing projects in areas where there's been flaring regulations. There's a number of different jurisdictions in Latin America, policymakers, governments that are thinking about implementing methane or flaring policy. It's certainly an area where I think technology and a lot of other factors have changed over the last few years, and where there's potentially experience from jurisdictions that have existing methane and flaring policy. Is there any advice or learnings that you would share with a regulator that's considering methane or flaring policy on ways to improve or maybe make that more efficient based on your experience in other jurisdictions? I'll sort of open the floor to, I guess, Angela to start and then go from there. Thanks.
Yep. Appreciate the question. So one of the challenges, I'll start with the challenge and then maybe a recommendation for how to avoid the challenges we have seen. I mentioned Colorado. It's one of the more stringent environmentally protective states. What we've seen is that the Federal Environmental Protection Agency has followed with regulations that somewhat mirror but are not exactly like the Colorado regulations. And in that case, we have overlapping, not clear which one is more stringent, which one, there's different timelines, different reporting, and so that's created some complications. I think a way to avoid that is have, if the regional regulations come first and then national later, that the national regulations recognize what's being done in the different areas. Additionally, I think the national regulations, if there's more of a performance-based approach that allows for innovation and each operator or region doing fit for purpose for what is their highest, most cost-effective highest emissions, that it can be the most cost-effective reductions in those areas, and just trying to not create duplications or contradictions in the different rules.
Thanks, Angela. Santiago, do you have anything to add to that?
Sure. Well, first of all, and we saw it when the regulation was implemented in Colombia, is that we need to make sure that whatever you require, operators are actually in a position to comply with in terms of technologies available in the country. So you need to make sure that if you are requiring any particular technology, that is actually available in the country. Or, for example, we saw some requirements around certification of certain reductions, and there was no official certifications in the country that made that possible. So the first thing is make sure that wherever you are, that what you require and is actually achievable. The second point I would say is to make sure that you're aligning with existing standards, because when you see operators operating across multiple jurisdictions, it's clearly an advantage that you are starting from there, for example, OGMP. I would also say pilot phases. Make sure that you have an initial phase where you can test out some of these things. Some of these technologies are emerging. This is still an emerging field, and there will be many things that you want to correct along the process. So make sure that you have some pilot phases. Fourth, I would say for Colombia, I think it was very beneficial to have the support, for example, of the World Bank, of the Clean and Climate Air coalitions that really supported those regulations. So I think that would make sense for any other country. And last but not least, it's crucial that any methane regulation is directly tied to your NDCs, to your global pledges to really make sense and to the operator and to the country as a whole.
Thanks, Santiago. That's certainly comprehensive and very interesting experience, I think, to share with other folks regionally that are likely going through similar things. Valeria, I'd like to turn to you on the flaring piece of this question, and if you could talk a bit about flaring regulations you've seen globally and potentially ways that those could be implemented more efficiently in your experience at Baker Hughes. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much for the question. There are several pledges, of course, around the world. The OGMP, the Oil and Gas Methane Partnership, has been actually mentioned by either Angela and Santiago, both, which defines the gold standard for measurement. I think this is the first one which actually is crucial, because by having a solid measurement, the gold standard of an accurate measurement, you can define a solid baseline. In this way, you can also build a solid roadmap and a plan for abatement, which is also part of the OGMP asks. So for sure, that is one that is making an impact in the industry. There is obviously the zero routine flaring by 2030 that the three of us have mentioned, which actually is very important, and it is also quite around the corner. So also to build up to what Angela and Santiago said to the previous question, I think that time is running out, and making sure to have all the stakeholders when starting defining the regulation and when starting a project as well is fundamental to avoid time wasting and making sure you are effective in deploying the solution. We also have to mention the Global Methane Pledge, which has been launched during the COP26, and it is actually being addressed by either countries and companies. So there are several initiatives, and you can see which are the countries or companies that are actually making an effort in that sense.
Thanks so much for that answer. There are a number of questions in the chat, and I probably won't ask the panel this question, but we'll put in a pitch for a webinar that's occurring next Friday. There's a number of different questions about advanced technology measurements, which are super important topics, but also the topic of the webinar that we're hosting next Friday, which we're really excited about. So I'd encourage folks to register for that and sign up as well if you want to hear more about the approaches folks are using to detect and measure methane emissions. In terms of a second question for the panel, I think there's some really interesting projects that you all have talked about implementing on abatement. So, and it probably looks a little different, I think, as Santiago had shared, between if you're looking at kind of industry averages and standard approaches versus individual projects being implemented in individual operation. Could you guys maybe speak a little bit to the types of stakeholders internally and the types of skill sets that are needed to really assess individual projects and move them from kind of that early phase, either on methane or flaring, to sort of the implementation phase? What kinds of stakeholders are you using within your organization, or Valeria, who you're partnering with at sort of company organizations to implement those projects? Maybe I'll start with you, Valeria, and then move on from there.
Thank you very much for the question. As mentioned during the whole webinar, actually in different ways, the journey is takes several steps. And every company and every country is at a different step of the journey. If they are at the very beginning, one asset that is fundamental is to leverage the advisory services, making sure you have help in understanding which are the options in terms of either emissions accounting, either technological solution, either financial opportunities to make sure your project is actually happening. So this is absolutely crucial. And I will state again the importance of having always the right stakeholders, understanding who can play a key role in your project and making sure that they are involved, they are committed, and they want you to reach the result. We are talking about available technology. So also looking out for the right technology provider that actually has experience in the field, that know how to deploy the technology, they know how to make the project happen and execute it, is absolutely fundamental.
Thank you so much. Santiago, would you like to share your experience in this area?
Sure. So it is a cross-cutting theme, and you do need a lot of areas from the company involved. So, of course, legal has to be involved now that you have regulation in place, operational folks who are doing the implementation of the projects, looking for operational improvements. You have the sustainability areas, consolidating all this information, making sure it's embedded in the GHG inventories, and looking to map out any national or international initiatives related to methane. You then have the financial areas to make sure that you also identify business cases for some of these reductions. And I would say building partnerships, as Valeria mentioned, is key to understand, to assess your problem, to identify sources of emissions, and etc. So if I were to talk about skills, I would say information management, developing internal capacities at some point to probably do the measurements yourself or through a partner. And last but not least, have someone constantly mapping out different technologies, look for opportunities, for example, with AI. So somebody needs to be involved because this is moving very quickly.
Thanks for that comprehensive answer. Certainly a lot of stakeholders that need to be involved. Angela, is there any other perspective you'd like to add to this question?
Yes, agree with what has been said already. And just adding in the field staff for us is a very important piece of this, and the development team. What I mentioned with Colorado, being able to plan out the field, that was really helpful from the beginning. How can we locate facilities to tie into infrastructure for the electric grid or the pipelines? The field staff is an important piece of this as well, because they're the ones out there identifying the issues. Are they seeing trends, seeing problems? So I think it's a comprehensive effort from the ground up to drive reductions.
Great. Thank you. The field staff is certainly a very important stakeholder and the ones actually executing this on a day-to-day basis. So appreciate that. We have a very specific question from the audience around someone who's looking into how you would reduce methane emissions from tanks. Is there any experience folks could share around potential ways to do that and what's been sort of successful in your operations? Angela, I may start with you, just given some of the work in Colorado that you all mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned it, but the first way to do it is try to eliminate them. I know that's not possible everywhere. You need a collection facility. But yeah, tanks really are kind of problematic in terms of unexpected, unplanned emissions. Another approach that I mentioned was the vapor recovery units, where you can use those to try to get more gas into the pipeline. And then those pressure transducers to make sure you're not overpressuring your tanks. Those are the three that we've been really successful for reducing emissions around it. And then these measurement programs to making sure that our flares are combusting everything completely when we do have to send gas to the flare.
Thanks, Angela. Santiago or Valeria, would either of you like to add on to that?
No, maybe what just small comment, and I think it depends on the maturity of your assets. I think that's when it gets tricky. If you have older assets with older tanks that were designed, for example, to bend, then a replacement there becomes becomes trickier. So I would say that's the advantage of when you start designing a new field, take into account those aspects that are hurting you the most with the more mature assets.
Great. There was an interesting question that came in from the audience that I maybe will start with Santiago on and move to if any of the other operators have experience with this. But there's a question on finance. I think, Santiago, you'd mentioned the role of the World Bank and the IFC in potentially funding some projects in Colombia. Could you maybe speak to the role of finance in sort of the methane or flaring abatement space?
Yes. So again, I think it depends on the type of company you are. Back in my former days when I was part of Ecopetrol, we saw some, let's say, opportunities, and we took advantage of some opportunities that were not necessarily available for independent companies. For example, we did measurements with cooperation funds from Canada and from the United Nations. Those doors, again, not necessarily open for independent companies. And the question pops up, why not? Maybe that's a question that we should address with some of these multilateral agencies to see if there is an opportunity to open up some finance streams in this regard. There are others, for example, Argentina, you talk about mining Bitcoins and pairing that to flaring. That's something that some operators are exploring, for example, in Argentina. Carbon credits. The problem with carbon credits is that once you have a regulation in place that is mandating those reductions, it's very difficult to find additionality. So again, you probably will not get to a point to issue those credits. So it's a tough one, to be quite honest. It's something that we're still exploring, and I don't have a better answer at this point.
Thanks. It's certainly a complicated topic for a variety of reasons. Appreciate your answer. Valeria or Angela, anything to kind of add on the topic? Or I'll maybe take one final question then for the audience. I think there's been some discussion on leak detection and technologies and those sorts of approaches. Could maybe the panelists speak to how you move from maybe a detection to prevention mindset as we start thinking about good facility design and operating practices? Santiago, you may want to start, and then I see Angela also shaking her head. No,
very quickly, again, you probably, if you have a mature operation, you already know what your problems are, probably tanks and compressors, etc. So I would say is that you have the better answers of when you're designing new fields, what to prevent, and there are new things available. I won't go into the details, but yeah, I think you already know the problems of what you're having right now. So design your future assets having that in mind.
On my side, I would like just one consideration, which is leverage the process of OGMP. OGMP actually can help you in really creating the database of your emission sources, define which are the technologies that are the best to fit within your level 4 and your level 5 to reach the gold standard, to perform a solid data reconciliation, and most importantly, to maintain the gold standard. There are the measurement market in terms of meta emissions is plenty of good technologies. You can hear about OGI cameras, drones, satellites. There is a lot, but you need to understand which combination of these technology will actually address you to make sure that you have a solid measurement that actually represents the sources of emissions that you currently have. And I'll leave it to Angela.
Just quickly, I think using your parametric data, if possible, to try to understand the trends and use that to inform whether you need to change a process or throttle back a well, any of that. And then making sure you're recording everything, looking at trends. Is there a certain type of equipment that needs to be replaced? Do you need to change preventive maintenance plans? All ways that you can try to not just find the emissions, but stop them before they start.
Amazing. I'd really like to thank the panelists for their time in putting together these presentations and their insights on practical implementation of methane and flaring reduction solutions. In addition, I'd like to thank ARPEL for hosting this webinar series and the translation staff for making sure this was available in both English and Spanish to increase the reach within Latin America. Finally, I'd like to thank the more than 200 participants we had in this webinar for taking time out of your day. I'd highly encourage you to join the webinar next week on detection and measurement technologies. So that's all of your drones, planes, all sorts of exciting and cool technology that's come onto the market, where we have 3 additional speakers sharing their practical experience with those technologies. Thanks so much for joining, and I hope everybody enjoys their weekend. Thank you.
Thank you all.